I'm really pleased to be joined on the Crispin Flintoff show by Craig Murray, who seems to get around quite a lot. How you doing, Craig?
Very well, thank you, Crispin. I'm well.
You've been out in Europe this week because Julian Assange has been there. He's made his first public appearance, really, since he was released. I was going to play a clip of what he said. This is at the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, a meeting of that, a committee of that. I'm just going to play that clip.
I want to be totally clear. I am not free today because the system worked. I am free today after years of incarceration because I pled guilty to journalism. I pled guilty to seeking information from a source. I pled guilty to obtaining information from a source. And I pled guilty to informing the public what that information was. I did not plead guilty to anything else. I hope my testimony today can serve to highlight the weaknesses of the existing safeguards and to help those whose cases are less visible but who are equally vulnerable. As I emerge from the dungeon of Belmarsh, the truth now seems less discernible, and I regret how much ground has been lost during that time period, how expressing the truth has been undermined, attacked, weakened, and diminished. I see more impunity, more secrecy, more retaliation for telling the truth, and more self-censorship. It is hard not to draw a line from the US government's prosecution of me, its crossing the Rubicon by internationally criminalism, to the chilled climate for freedom of expression that exists now.
Now, obviously, that's a very short clip of what he said. What did you make of his speech and the whole meeting there that he spoke at?
Well, obviously it was a very powerful speech, as you saw there. It's if you like, it's more a statement than it is rhetoric. It reads extremely well, and I think a number of the things that came over were his shock at how things have gone backwards, how there's less internet freedom, there's more repressive legislation, there's less diversity in the media than there was when he went into prison years ago. And also the constant emphasis on the fact that those people whose crimes WikiLeaks revealed, and those crimes being extraordinarily, being illegal war, being torture, being assassination, being abduction, the whole range of war crimes, nobody's been punished for any of them. The only people who've been punished were Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning, and he was very strong on the view that he's eventually having to accept a plea bargain wasn't a triumph for freedom getting him free. It was the end of a lengthy ordeal that should never have happened. It was a powerful speech delivered in a very sober and measured fashion, as you saw there.
I mean, do you think he looks very he looks healthy to me? He looks like his wits are about him as well. I mean, would you say he's come out of that long period in not such bad shape?
No, I wouldn't, to be honest. He seemed to me to be about 70% there. And Julian's a very formidable person, and 70% of Julian is probably as good as 100% of you or me. But for Julian, that really was quite a subdued performance. There was little of the the sparkle, if you like, the intellectual sparkle and spontaneity that he's so good of, or the tone of authority with which he used to speak. And I'm sure that will all come back. But I actually was worried about him. You know, I'm not personally of the view that it's time for him to come back into public life yet. I think he needs a little more time. He said himself, he said at the start that the years of, particularly of solitary confinement and isolation, had taken their toll both mentally and physically, and that he was aware that he wasn't as this wasn't as strong a performance as people might normally expect him to give. And in a press conference afterwards, Stella said that while maintaining Julian's privacy about his health, she thought she should say, but he's still very much in recovery. And I think that's true. I'm hoping we don't actually see him again for another 2 or 3 months. But the timing of this was dictated by the fact that this very important Council of Europe report and vote was being taken. So it wasn't his choice of timing. But I do hope now that perhaps till after Christmas he'll go back into that period of rehabilitation and recovery with his family, but that he needs to get fully back up to strength, and that he won't tire himself out by trying to do too much just now.
Right. Okay, that's true. I mean, he's been through hell. I mean, I'm astonished at how well he looks. That's the main. I'm looking at it that way. But just wondering what if you could let us know what the meeting was, the Council of Europe meeting that he was at, and the resolution that was passed. What is that all about? Because it's quite a confusing area, the European Union and all the committees and stuff.
No, it's very confusing, and the Council of Europe is not actually a European Union body. It predates the European Union. There are 3 basic organizations of European political and security architecture, if you like. There's the Council of Europe, which is tasked specifically with dealing with human rights and democracy. And that was intended as a body. It used to include Russia, for example, and that was intended to include the entire European space and try to bring into being the mechanisms of détente, if you like, to improve democratic accountability throughout the shared European space and to bring Eastern Europe and Western Europe together. That was the idea of it. And the European Court of Human Rights is a Council of Europe body. It's not a European Union body. The Council of Europe is entirely separate from the European Union. Now, the European Union is a smaller body of a narrower membership, which, and for example, the UK is still a member of the Council of Europe. It's not a member of the European Union. The European Union is a smaller body with a narrower membership, and with obviously, a budget which is billions and billions larger, and an economic role which Council of Europe doesn't have. And the European Union has a parliament which is elected. Members of the citizens in the European Union elect their parliament directly. The Council of Europe doesn't have an elected parliament in that sense, but the Council of Europe has an assembly to which national parliaments send representatives. So each national parliament elects from within itself its representatives for the Council of Europe. And the UK does that. The UK is entitled to a certain number of representatives in the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly, and it sends them from the different political parties in the UK. They don't all come from the governing party, and that's typical across Europe. And in fact, it's even more slightly complicated because the UK hasn't yet elected its new representatives since the last general election. So the UK representatives in the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly are still those who were elected or appointed to that position following Boris Johnson's election victory. So there are a number of Tories who have actually lost their seats, who are still in the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly until Keir Starmer's government get round to organising the appointment of their replacement. So
they're MPs then. They're all MPs.
They're all MPs, except some of the British ones aren't anymore.
Right,
but
okay.
yes, all members of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe are MPs from their home country, appointed to represent at this Parliamentary Assembly. And if you like, the real importance of the Council of Europe is that it has the European Court of Human Rights. And the European Court of Human Rights, of course, makes binding law and makes decisions which are very much binding on other states and to which states give effect. Whereas the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly passes resolutions which recommend that states do something, but they things and may recommend the European Union does things, but they are recommendations. They're not compulsory.
Right. So okay. So the resolution that was presented to them about Julian Assange, which said that he was prosecuted and detained in the United Kingdom as a political prisoner. I mean that was the resolution, I believe. That was voted. It was passed in a vote by 88 to 13. Does that mean it is then passed on to the European Union in some way? Who's it passed on to?
The European Parliament will probably will consider it because it contained recommendations of things the European Union ought to do, but the European Parliament is not obliged to follow it. The European Parliament may take a different view, and to date has taken a different view. The European Parliament has been extremely unhelpful over Julian Assange and very resistant. And what's quite interesting is that in the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly, the representatives of, for example, the European People's Party, which is Angela Merkel's lot, if you like, and the representatives mostly of sort of the Macron groups, supported Julian Assange strongly. Whereas in the European Parliament, they're members of the same parties who are in the European Parliament have refused to support and have taken the position of keeping the subject off the agenda. And I think the reason for that is interesting. It's because the Council of Europe actually set up a committee of inquiry to look into the case. And the thing with the Assange case is all around the world, there's been so much mainstream media disinformation, and politicians are probably even more susceptible to mainstream media disinformation than ordinary people, that the members of the European Parliament just believe what they read, that Julian Assange is a rapist and a terrible human being who caused the deaths of loads of Americans and that kind of thing, or all this nonsense propaganda. Was when the Council of Europe actually set up a committee to look at it, they found out that the truth is completely different. And all of the political parties had members of that committee. And those members of the committee reported back saying, look, actually, what we've heard is not true. This actually is the truth after serious and lengthy inquiry. And so that I think it was the establishment of an inquiry that led the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly to take a different view. And I'm hopeful that may now lead the European Parliament also to set up an inquiry.
I mean, the fact it passed by 88 to 13 is quite astonishing. Were you surprised at that? I mean, that's a massive result, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah. And in the debates, nobody spoke on the other side. And the only votes against were from basically the the very right-wing grouping, which is the British Conservatives and the nutty Polish Catholic nationalists in alliance. But they were the only people who voted against it. And all of the mainstream European political parties voted in favour of Julian Assange and voted that Julian Assange was a political prisoner. There was one wonderful moment. My favourite moment in the debate was when the Sinn Féin member of the Parliamentary Assembly, Paul Graham, stood up and stated that as an Irish Republican, he knew all about the British having political prisoners, and for anybody to claim that Britain is a democracy which does not have a political prisoners is something that any Irishman can tell you is a complete and utter lie. And that was a good moment in the debate.
So that you didn't really hear much countering that. So is this maybe a way of humouring Julian Assange, but not actually going to get anywhere? I mean, is that a fear of that this might just be a kind of a show of support, but with no justice for him coming his way? I mean, being in jail for 14 years, I mean, he needs some kind of justice for that, doesn't he? I mean, is it likely that this will help towards that?
One of the things we learned was that his plea bargain from the United States, the terms of his plea bargain state he is not allowed to go to the European Court of Human Rights, and that he is not allowed to pursue information through the Freedom of Information Act. He's barred from doing either of those things to try to get further justice. I actually don't see how they can make that stick. If he chooses to go to the European Court of Human Rights, and remember, the Council of Europe is the body that set up the European Court of Human Rights. So one place where a resolution of the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly is actually very important is in a case before the European Court of Human Rights, because the European Court of Human Rights will take it seriously and quote it in exactly the same way as the International Court of Justice quotes United Nations General Assembly opinions. Right. So if Julian were to go to the European Court of Human Rights, the Americans could say, okay, the plea deal is, you've broken the terms of the plea deal is off, we're going to try to now bring new charges against you. But I can't see any European country, even the United Kingdom, I cannot see jailing Julian and trying to extradite him because he dared to go to the European Court of Human Rights. And that seems to me wildly improbable. I don't see how the Americans can enforce that ban on him going to the European Court of Human Rights. And it's actually worth noting that among the kind of rather large entourage that Julian had with him were the lawyers, the Belgian lawyers' legal team, Belgian and French legal teams, who were specifically charged all along with preparing his appeal to the European Court of Human Rights had he lost in the High Court in London. So the people who have been involved in getting ready to go to the European Court of Human Rights are still on the books and still being paid. And that seems to me to indicate it's quite likely that he'd be maybe looking to do that and to challenge those terms of his plea bargain.
I mean, are those the only ways he could possibly get some kind of justice through going through the European Court of Human Rights?
That's right, yeah. That is the only way. And I think, there's a very strong case, and this helps it a lot, that he's been appallingly mistreated by the British government. And that would help. But it depends really what you want to do, because he'll never get the 14 years of his life back. Those 14 years of his life have gone. And there always has to be a question. And he spoke of his interest in cryptology and advances in cryptology, of the interaction between cryptology and artificial intelligence, about developments in artificial intelligence. And he made the point that he hadn't been in a position to keep current on all of these, which are the areas of his expertise. I mean, he needs time. He needs time to read up and get absolutely back to the intellectual cutting edge of these. And it may be that in the end he decides he wants to move on and do other stuff and just leave his period behind him. It may be that, spending time and resources on pursuing a kind of notion of justice, even from the European Court of Human Rights, is not the best use of his time.
Right. I mean, he is obviously someone who is a massive. People would listen to anything he says. People would listen to what Julian Assange says. He could be a massive figure, but you think maybe it's too much for him at the moment to take on this, because so many journalists are being arrested. You yourself were arrested coming back through the airport, and we had Sarah Wilkinson and we've had Richard Medhurst. I mean, he would be someone who would be really important if he could speak out on that.
But that's true. I mean, he didn't speak out about individual cases, but he did talk about the threat to freedom of speech being even greater than it was at the time he went into prison. And he did talk about the need to protect journalists and activists, and that that there shouldn't be this distinction between journalists and activists. He actually spoke directly to that, saying that every journalist should be an activist for the truth. So he's well aware of what's happening. And I think he will speak out about it, but I just think it's too early. I just think he needs a few months more healing to get back to full strength before he's ready to enter into the picture battle. But I do believe he will be a leader on those kind of issues. And as I say, and in a sense, I'd almost rather he did that than spend time trying to pursue the injustice that was done to him through the European Court of Human Rights. But of course, he has the right to choose what he wants to do about what happened to him.